Most women think silence is a weakness in love. They fear it will be read as indifference, or worse, rejection. Yet in the theatre of male perception, silence is not absence, it is an active force, bending and shaping his inner narrative. The quieter she becomes, the louder his mind works to fill the void. And in that space, his illusions begin to multiply. Have you ever noticed how a man grows restless when he cannot read you? Carl Jung once said that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. In the absence of a woman's words, a man's unconscious projects its own story upon her, shaped by his desires, fears, and shadow wounds. He mistakes the silence for a mirror, not realizing it is a veil one that reflects his own inner world far more than hers. He begins to chase not the woman herself, but the image of her his mind has constructed. The feminine silence is not passive. It is an archetypal force, an embodiment of the high priestess who guards the threshold between the known and the unknown. When she withholds immediate reactions, she denies him the comfort of certainty. And the male psyche, wired to pursue clarity and conquest, begins to spiral into a kind of symbolic hunt not for her words, but for resolution to the tension she has invoked. The Stoics wrote of the danger of chasing what is not within one's control. Silence is the perfect reminder that no amount of logic or force can open a door that is closed from within. This is why silence distorts reality. The male mind, when denied direct answers, starts to paint the void with colors of his own past. A man who fears abandonment will imagine she is slipping away. A man who thrives on validation will believe she is testing his worth. The quiet woman becomes the canvas for his anima, feminine image within him, allowing his projections to run unchecked. He does not yet realize that what he feels is not her essence, but the echo of his own inner conflicts. In Jungian terms, her silence activates the process of individuation, though not always in the way he expects. The lack of external cues forces him inward, toward the unlit corridors of his psyche. Here, his rational mind battles his unconscious impulses, as the need to define her becomes a stand-in for his deeper need to confront himself. But unless he is aware of this dynamic, the distortions can harden into convictions. She must be thinking this, she must be feeling that. Soon, he is no longer in dialogue with her, but with the version of her his shadow has assembled. There is a dangerous beauty to this. For the woman, it is a quiet form of power, not because she manipulates, but because she allows the unseen forces within him to surface. Like still water revealing the sky, her silence mirrors back his inner weather without altering its course. He may accuse her of being distant, mysterious, or withholding, yet it is his own inability to sit with the unknown that drives his discomfort. The alchemy happens not in her speaking, but in her remaining anchored as the storm rages within him. But this is not without risk. Prolonged silence, without the grounding of truth or the framework of trust, can amplify paranoia. In the wrong hands, or the wrong hearts, it can become a breeding ground for misunderstanding and emotional warfare. Stoic wisdom warns that perception is not reality, yet the human heart is easily swayed by the stories it tells itself. Without the discipline to question his assumptions, a man may turn her stillness into a sentence, casting her as cold or uncaring when in truth she is simply self-contained. The feminine silence is therefore both medicine and mirror to the man who is ready to face himself. It becomes an initiation into deeper self. To the man ruled by impulse and insecurity, it becomes a labyrinth from which he may never emerge with clarity. And yet, this duality is precisely why it is so potent. It is not her role to resolve the distortion, just as it is not the moon's role to correct the tides, but to remain in integrity with her own rhythm. If you, as a woman, have ever withheld a response, not out of malice, but out of self-respect, you have felt this current. The stillness is not a game. It is a reclamation of space in a world that often demands your constant availability. It is the art of letting him reveal himself in the absence of your influence. Jung might say that in those moments you are allowing his unconscious to speak more loudly than your words ever could. And so the distortion begins, not because you deceived him, but because he could not yet see beyond himself. His reality bends under the weight of his own projections, and he believes. The shape is yours. What he does next will reveal not who you are, but who he has always been. This is the silent crucible in which truth and illusion wrestle for dominance, and where the feminine learns that sometimes the most powerful thing she can say is nothing at all. In the days or weeks when a woman chooses silence, a man begins to experience a subtle shift in the axis of his inner world. The familiar feedback loop, stimulus, response, validation is broken. His mind, accustomed to confirming its reality through her words and tone, now roams unanchored in the sea of possibilities. In that absence, the archetypes of his unconscious stir like old gods awakened by a forgotten ritual. They whisper into his thoughts, coloring each imagined scenario with fragments of memory, longing, and fear. Carl Jung understood that when the anima is projected onto a woman, she becomes the vessel of a man's idealized or wounded feminine. In silence, that projection intensifies, because there is no verbal reality to dissolve it. Without new information to update his perception, he replays old emotional tapes, searching for patterns to decode her meaning. Sometimes these patterns are inherited beliefs absorbed from his mother, past lovers, or cultural scripts about what a woman's quiet must signify. He is no longer seeing her. He is seeing every woman who has ever mattered to him, layered upon her form like translucent veils. This is where distortion reaches its peak. A simple pause in communication can be magnified into an omen. A few hours of delayed response become evidence of disinterest. A calm withdrawal is mistaken for a storm brewing beneath the surface. The Stoics taught that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgment of them that causes turmoil. Yet in matters of the heart, the human mind rarely stays neutral. Her silence becomes a Rorschach test, and the inkblots he sees say more about his own soul than about her reality. And here lies the paradox. Silence can either deepen attraction or unravel it. For some men, the unknown is intoxicating. It draws them forward, sparks their curiosity, and invites them into the sacred pursuit of what they cannot fully grasp. For others, the same unknown breeds resentment, anxiety, and the impulse to retreat. The woman's silence acts like a mirror held to their resilience, revealing whether they can sit in uncertainty without needing to dominate it with premature conclusions. The feminine, when embodied consciously, knows that silence is not the absence of connection, but the refinement of it. It is the art of holding her own center, refusing to rush into performance just to soothe his unease. This restraint is not cruelty, it is discipline. It says, I am not here to manage your emotions at the expense of my own truth. In doing so, she forces him perhaps for the first time to become an active participant in understanding rather than a passive consumer of reassurance. Yet silence is not a blunt weapon to be wielded indiscriminately. When used as punishment or manipulation, it poisons the very space it seeks to protect. The psyche, whether male or female, responds poorly to the weaponization of withdrawal. Jung warned of the shadow, those disowned aspects of the self that, when denied, emerge through destructive behavior. If her silence is born from unspoken rage or fear, it will carry an energetic charge that communicates more loudly than words ever could, and he will feel it instinctively, even if he cannot name it. The healthy feminine silence is different. It is rooted in sovereignty, in the calm knowing that she is not responsible for correcting the distortions in another's mind. Like a mountain unmoved by the clouds that gather around its peak, she remains steady, understanding that clarity, if it comes, must come from within him. This steadiness can feel maddening to a man trapped in projection, but for one ready to grow, it becomes a rare and transformative gift. It invites him to examine the gap between what is real and what is imagined. When a man accepts that gap, he begins to detach from the tyranny of his immediate interpretations. He learns to sit with unanswered questions without filling them with fear. This is where the alchemy begins, not in her breaking the silence, but in his breaking the cycle of assumption. In that quiet space, he can start to hear his own inner dialogue with fresh ears, recognizing which voices are truly his and which are echoes of the past. In this way, the distortion caused by feminine silence is not inherently harmful. It is a teacher. It challenges the comfort of a fixed narrative and exposes the fragility of unexamined certainty. And though many will resist it, some will rise to meet it, stepping beyond the reactive mind into a deeper field of awareness. Here, the relationship, whether it continues or not, becomes a crucible for individuation, where both man and woman are called to stand in the naked truth of themselves. There is a moment, often unspoken, when the silence becomes almost physical, an invisible presence in the space between them. It sits at the dinner table, lingers in the pauses of text messages, and hovers in the air like incense that refuses to fade. For the man, it is no longer simply the absence of her words. It becomes a living force pressing against the edges of his mind. He starts to sense that this quiet is not empty but charged, as though behind it lies a choice she has already made, or a truth she has already claimed in Jungian terms. This is the moment when the unconscious takes command of the conscious. Narrative. The male ego, which thrives on cause and effect logic, suddenly loses its footing. Her silence disrupts the neat sequence of stimulus and response, introducing an element of chaos that the psyche desperately tries to resolve. But chaos is also the birthplace of transformation. Without the familiar cues of her agreement, her laughter, or her reassurance, he is left to confront the raw material of his inner world. This is where the distortion can become dangerous. The absence of reality testing, her words to confirm, or denials the mind to drift toward extremes. One moment, he may idealize her as an enigmatic goddess testing his worth. The next, he may condemn her as cold or calculating. Both are projections, shaped not by who she is, but by the archetypes and emotional imprints living within him. In truth, she might simply be tending to herself, pulling her energy inward to realign with her own center. Silence, when practiced consciously, does not seek to punish or confuse. It is a container, a womb for clarity. In the feminine archetype, it mirrors the deep, still waters that conceal life beneath the surface. There is movement, but it is subtle, invisible to the impatient gaze. For the man, this can be infuriating, because it denies him the immediate gratification of resolution. But for the woman, It is a necessary act of self-preservation, an honoring of her own emotional and psychic boundaries. The Stoics would recognize this as the refusal to be reactive. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes invincible when it refuses to let external events dictate its peace. Feminine silence, in its healthiest form, is exactly this: a refusal to be dragged into a dance she did not choose, to respond merely because she is expected to. It is the ability to let the moment breathe, without collapsing under the pressure of his need for definition. Yet, from his perspective, this breathing space can feel like suffocation. The more he tries to pull answers from her stillness, the more it slips through his grasp. Jung would say this is the anima's grip tightening not because she holds it, but because he refuses to see that it is his own hand clinging to the image he's created. The truth is that her silence doesn't distort reality, reveals how distorted his reality already was. For the woman, the challenge is to remain anchored, to resist the temptation to break the silence prematurely in order to soothe his growing discomfort. If she speaks too soon, she risks entering his projection rather than staying in her truth. But if she waits too long, she risks being misread entirely, her silence taken as consent for his invented story. This is why feminine silence is a delicate art. It must be guided not by ego, but by clarity of intent. When used as a conscious tool, silence becomes a mirror so pure that it reflects without distortion. In that mirror, a man is forced to see what is his and what is not. He must confront whether his reactions are rooted in genuine connection or in the insecurities and unmet needs he has carried for years. This is where the real work begins, not in extracting words from her, but in extracting truth from himself. Sometimes, this journey ends in deeper intimacy. A man who can withstand the quiet without demanding its immediate end learns to listen in ways most never do. He discovers that communication is not only in speech, but in presence, in energy, in the subtle shifts of expression that words can often disguised. Other times, the silence marks the beginning of separation, not because it was meant to harm, but because it revealed incompatibility in how they handle uncertainty and autonomy. In both cases, the silence has done its work, has acted as a catalyst, forcing movement where there was stagnation, pulling unconscious patterns into the light. And in that light, reality, whether painful or liberating, can finally be seen for what it is. There comes a point when the man, caught in the gravitational pull of her silence, must decide how he will respond, not to her, but to himself. For days, maybe weeks, he has been orbiting her mystery, projecting meaning onto her stillness, like a painter layering color upon a blank canvas. But the canvas has not changed. The change is in him. He begins to realize that what distorts his perception is not her quiet, but his own inability to tolerate the unknown without defining it. In Jung's language, he is standing at the edge of the unconscious, where the shadow waits. The shadow is every feeling he denies, every fear he avoids, every wound he insists does not exist. Her silence pulls these elements to the surface because there is no distraction to keep them buried. Without her verbal cues, the mask of composure slips, and beneath it, he encounters the boy who once feared being unseen, unloved, or abandoned. She has not caused these feelings, they were there long before she appeared. But her silence has illuminated them in stark relief. This is why feminine silence is both misunderstood and feared. It is not a manipulative trick. It is a crucible. When she withholds words, she forces him into a confrontation with the parts of himself he might otherwise avoid forever. For the woman, this is not always easy. She may feel his agitation, his pulling away, his subtle or overt accusations. Yet if she breaks the silence prematurely to rescue him from discomfort, she rescues him from his own growth and, in doing so, betrays herself in the archetypal landscape. She is the high priestess, the guardian of inner mysteries. She knows that not all doors should be opened on demand, that sometimes the waiting is the initiation. This is not about punishment, but about rhythm, the natural ebb and flow that all living things obey. Just as the moon withholds its full light until its time, she understands that revelation is most powerful when it arrives unforced. Her silence is her alignment with that truth. The distortion he experiences is a mirror of his relationship with uncertainty. A man who has made peace with ambiguity will approach her quiet with curiosity rather than panic. He will sense the richness beneath it, even if he does not yet understand its meaning. But a man who seeks control will wrestle with it, twisting its shape until it justifies his own narrative. In this way, her silence reveals his relationship not only to her, but to life itself. The Stoics spoke often of the discipline of perception, the ability to separate what is from what is imagined. Her silence tests this discipline. Can he resist, making her into a symbol of his fears? Can he hold space for her autonomy without demanding proof of her affection? In modern psychological terms, this is the difference between secure attachment and anxious pursuit. A secure man sees her silence as a chapter, not the whole book. An anxious man reads it as the final page. For the woman, mastery of silence requires stillness. It demands that she check her motives. Is she silent to maintain her sovereignty, or to provoke a reaction? Is she protecting her peace, or avoiding her own vulnerability? The power of silence comes not from the act itself, but from the energy beneath it. A silence rooted in self-possession is magnetic. A silence rooted in fear is brittle, and sooner or later, it will crack. When both man and woman meet in this space consciously, something profound happens. The distortion dissolves. He stops trying to decode her silence as a puzzle to be solved, and begins to see it as a state to be respected. She stops using it as a shield, and begins to use it as a truth. In that moment, communication transcends words. They begin to speak in the subtler language of presence, where each trusts the other enough to leave space unfilled. But not every connection will survive the silence. For some, it will be the revelation that they are walking different paths. For others, it will be the bridge that carries them into a deeper, more honest bond. Either way, the silence will have done its work. It will have exposed the illusions that speech too often hides, and in the quiet aftermath, both will see more clearly who they are, what they value, and whether they can walk forward together. Eventually, the silence reaches its most potent phase, not the beginning, where confusion stirs, nor the middle, where projections flare, but the point where it becomes a choice rather than a reaction. This is where the woman has fully claimed it, not as a defense mechanism, but as an act of alignment. She is no longer withholding to test him, nor retreating to punish. She is simply dwelling in her own frequency, untethered from the demand to be understood at every moment. And in this space, the balance of power shifts not toward dominance, but toward clarity. For the man, this stage feels different. The frantic need to interpret begins to wane, replaced by a quiet recognition. Perhaps she is not a puzzle to solve, but a reality to meet. Jung would say he is withdrawing the projection of the anima, recognizing that she is not his inner ideal or his inner wound made flesh, but a separate being with her own interiority. This realization can be humbling, even disorienting. It strips away the illusion that love means constant access, and in its place offers something rarer: respect. When a man reaches this point, the distortion begins to collapse. The images he built in her absence, goddess, temptress, adversary, fade into the background. What remains is the awareness that silence is not inherently for or against him. It simply is. Just as the ocean's tides do not ebb and flow for one sailor's voyage, her silence is not always personal. It is the rhythm of her own inner world. The Stoics would see this as the acceptance of what lies beyond one's control, the surrender to reality as it is, rather than as we wish it to be. For the woman, this acceptance from him is a turning point. It allows her silence to breathe without being miscast as hostility. It opens the possibility for her to speak again, not because he demands it, but because the space between them is now clear of projections. This is the paradox. When he no longer grasps for meaning, her words return naturally, not out of obligation, but out of authentic desire. The connection, if it continues, is reborn on different ground, freer, cleaner, and rooted in mutual recognition. Yet, the danger remains for those who cannot release their distortions. A man who clings to his assumptions will eventually act upon them, treating his imagined version of her as reality. This is where many relationships fractionate, because of what was said, but because of what was believed without being spoken. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In this way, unexamined distortions born from silence can become self-fulfilling prophecies. The empowered feminine understands this risk, which is why her silence is not indefinite. It is not a void to be maintained forever, but a sacred interval, like the rest between notes in music. It is a pause that allows both to hear themselves more clearly. When it has served its purpose, whether by deepening intimacy or revealing incompatibility, she will choose her next action with intention. Sometimes that means words, sometimes it means walking away. In both cases, the choice is hers. In modern psychological language, this is the boundary in action. Silence is not about control, it is about agency. It is the refusal to collapse into over-explaining, over-pleasing, or overcompensating to hold a connection. It is the living proof that presence does not have to be constant to be real. A woman who knows how to inhabit her silence without apology communicates something profound. I exist beyond your perception of me. This truth can be unsettling, because it means the relationship is no longer built on the comfort of illusion. It demands that both partners interact with each other as whole, separate beings. For the man, it requires a humility that many have never practiced. For the woman, it requires the courage to remain herself, even when misunderstood. And in that meeting, when neither tries to distort the other into a reflection of their own inner needs, love, if it exists, has room to become something truer than either imagined. The distortion her silence once created now stands revealed as a mirror, and in the reflection he sees himself sometimes for the first time without the camouflage of her constant affirmation. She, in turn, sees the man he becomes when he no longer chases ghosts. What they do with that vision determines the rest of the story. There is a rare kind of stillness that comes when two people have moved through the storm of projection and into the calm beyond it. The silence that once twisted his perception now feels different, less like a void to be feared, and more like a space that holds. This is the silence after truth has been seen, the silence in which masks have been set down and neither needs to grasp for control. It is no longer about her withholding or his chasing. It is about the mutual recognition that both have inner worlds no one else can fully enter. For the man who arrives here, something shifts deep in his core. He no longer demands that her every pause be explained. He no longer treats uncertainty as a threat to be conquered. Jung might call this the integration of the anima, the moment when the feminine within him is no longer projected outward, but reclaimed as a part of himself. She is still mysterious, but she is no longer a mystery he must solve. She is simply herself, and that is enough. The woman standing in this space feels the difference in his presence. Where before there was tension in his gaze, now there is ease. Where there was urgency in his words, now there is patience. She senses that he is not trying to pull her out of herself prematurely, and because of this, her words, when they come, are not defensive offerings, but voluntary gifts. The relationship begins to breathe in a way it could not before. Its rhythm is no longer dictated by fear, but by choice. Yet not every man will reach this stage. For some, the distortion of her silence becomes too much, too threatening to the ego. They retreat into certainty, even if that certainty is built on fiction. They decide who she is in their minds and act accordingly, never allowing the possibility that their story was wrong. This is the tragedy of unexamined projection. It locks both people into roles neither truly chose. In such cases, the silence becomes the end rather than the bridge. The empowered feminine knows this risk, but she does not abandon her self-possession to avoid it. She understands that not every connection is meant to endure, and that forcing it through overexposure or constant explanation often corrodes it faster than distance ever could. Her silence, then, is an act of trust not in him, but in herself. She trusts her own timing, her own intuition, her own capacity to walk away if the truth revealed in that space is not aligned with her path. From a Stoic lens, this is the mastery of what is within one's control. She cannot control his thoughts, his assumptions, or his readiness to meet her in truth. But she can control her own boundaries, her own energy, her own choice to engage or withdraw. In this way, silence becomes the embodiment of self-control. Is not passive, it is active containment, the guarding of what is precious until it can be met with equal care. When both partners honor this dynamic, something remarkable happens. Words regain their weight. In a world saturated with constant noise, their conversations feel rare, intentional, and alive. Silence no longer threatens connection. It strengthens it, because both have learned that absence does not have to mean loss. It can mean trust. It can mean respect. It can mean the quiet confidence of two sovereign beings, choosing, moment by moment, to meet each other without illusion. And so, the distortion fades, replaced by something far more enduring. He no longer fears what she does not say. She no longer fears being misunderstood. They may still falter. Human love is never perfect, but their bond is no longer built on the fragile scaffolding of projection. It rests on the steady ground of mutual recognition. In the final measure, the silence has not broken them. It has remade them. The woman who knows this lives by a truth that cannot be faked. She does not fill every space with sound to keep someone close. She lets the space be what it is, and allows what is real to remain. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.